Vanessa, thank you so much for being on the Heyo with Kelsey Moore podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I am so excited to have a good conversation with you today. You are a functional nutritionist and owner of Nourished Functional. I believe that's how you say it. So I would love for you to start out, just tell a bit about your story and how you became a functional nutritionist. One, how you became a nutritionist, and why do you espouse that functional or holistic mindset with it? And then we'll go from there.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's start back in childhood, probably. So no, I'm going to keep it concise, but no. So I grew up absolutely loving food. I thought I was going to be a chef and have a restaurant one day. So I really tried to live that dream out and went to hospitality management school, Cal Poly Pomona in California, and I think the thread for so many years was that just I loved food, I loved people, and I thought it was going to look a certain way in more of that kind of service industry. And over the years, there were different things that happened in my own life and in family life that really opened my eyes to just kind of the whole world of health and wellness and sort of the differences between conventional and kind of integrative functional holistic world. And so a lot of that had to do with I lost my father at a pretty young age due to now what I know is very preventable kind of lifestyle related issues. And when I started to deal with my own little health issues, I mean, thankfully it was never anything extreme. But just even throughout high school and college, I started to deal with my own fatigue, acne, eczema, hives. It was just this variety of things of just not feeling my best. And kind of through a combination of a lot of different things, I discovered sort of this alternative way, right, with integrative health. And as I started experimenting on myself and changing the way that I ate and just kind of lived my life over the years, it was so eye-opening for me to be like, oh wow, we actually have control. Like we can feel empowered in our own health and not just, do what we're uh, do what we're told in sort of that conventional setting. And there's absolutely a time and place for it, right? So not against Western medicine at all, but it was so hopeful to me to know that I could do something about my own health and not go down the same path that my dad had. And so over the years, I was in hospitality management, did that for a few years and totally was burning out. The lifestyle of the restaurant industry is really rough. I have so much compassion for all those in the industry. And I just couldn't get enough of researching holistic functional nutrition on my own. Like I just couldn't get enough of it and decided to make a pivot. So I went back to school, Saybrook University, and got my master's in integrative and functional nutrition. And I graduated, became a CNS, which is a certified nutrition specialist. So that really focuses in on personalized functional nutrition versus, again, because everything can be sort of conventional or alternative even in the nutrition world, right? We know that. So I was able to specialize in specifically functional nutrition and have been practicing ever since, and that thing has been around 3 to 4 years. Yeah.
So one hot question, and you can go as far as just like as superficial as you want, but could you, on an academic level, like explain the difference between a dietitian and a certified nutrition specialist?
Absolutely. It's a really good question. So the biggest difference is, so a dietitian is going to have a similar education. They're going to get a bachelor's. Now they're required to also get a master's, and they have to get hours, pass exams, but their training is going to be more broad. It's going to include inpatient, outpatient. It's quite broad. And they're set up to do a whole bunch of different type of work in different facilities and styles of treatment with medical nutrition therapy. The reason that I didn't go that path was because I was a career changer. And if I wanted to go down that path, I would have had to go to school for, I would have to redo my entire education experience. And because I was personally not interested in working in an acute setting, feeding tubes, inpatient setting at all, I knew what my focus was. I wanted to get more specialized training. And for, traditional dietitian school, you're getting the conventional training. You're not necessarily getting specialties. So I have lots of functional RD friends and colleagues, and from what I've learned, most of them have all had to get additional training in the integrative and functional space on top of their RD, certifications and licenses. So that's kind of overview. With a CNS, I had to have a master's. I had to get 1,000 hours of supervised practice experience, pass an exam. So definitely some overlap, but the actual education part was more specialized.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of what my assumptions were. And also in your CNS, like academic courses, were they heavily relying on like the Weston A. Price Foundation? Like, was it much
Oh, yeah.
more of an ancestral based mindset versus, again, I'm making assumptions here. And again, the dietitians that I'm running into are obviously ones that are working in a more like a sports setting, but they're also, excuse me, getting conventional dietetics training. But they're going based off of just like the basic, like, recommended daily values of certain things. I feel like it's very like, I don't know, without getting too conspiratorial, it feels like a little bit more like bought and paid for education.
Yeah.
Whereas, again, making an assumption, would love for you to like, correct me here. The certified nutrition specialist curriculum feels much more like, ancestral based. Is that correct?
So, CNS is a board certification. So I don't necessarily get the education from a CNS, if that makes sense. Like I just have to kind of
Okay.
meet certain competencies to be able to
Okay.
like pass their exam. The
Okay.
CNS, their whole thing is personalized nutrition. So that could look a bunch of different ways. That could look ancestral. That could look, a lot of different ways, but it's definitely still it's that personalization. That's the really big thing, which we don't really get in conventional world anyway,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but I will say that with my master's degree, I definitely learned a lot about, ancestral diets, but it was nice because we weren't pushed to think a certain way, right? And that's what's nice about, I think, school and like education is, you're not being forced to think about something a certain way, but you're presented with a variety of different evidence versus just the evidence that you're typically
Mm-hmm.
shown, maybe in a traditional setting. And so I would say a lot of us out of that probably still, tended to agree and see the benefits more of an ancestral diet approach. However, some people might still kind of adopt, more of a plant-based mindset or something else.
Sure. So why did you personally choose to go with an ancestral based mindset?
So, I mean, I think that it has just made sense to me. Like, I would say that's
Mm-hmm.
my simple answer. There's
Yeah.
more to that, but I would say it makes sense to me in so many ways that our bodies thrive off of nutrients, right? It's not just about caloric intake and about macronutrients. It's I really think there has to be such an emphasis on micronutrients, and where are the most abundant micronutrients, in all of our food supply is, animal-based foods. And so I think just looking at also the research and opening my eyes to the way that food is processed, the way that food is grown, and how, it's not, uh, we're not getting the full story of just, beef is bad because beef is bad, right? It's the way that these animals are treated, the way they're grown, the way they're fed. And so as I've learned more about all of that and kind of coupled that with just the common sense of it for me and also how I've felt, and then now, being in practice for a few years, I've, helped hundreds of different clients, and I have seen again and again and again that when people shift their diet into a more nutrient dense, anti-inflammatory based diet, like they are better. And don't get me wrong, like I have had several vegetarian, like plant-based people, and I will always honor what they need or want. And I see I see them get better too. But I also think that there's limits sometimes to the amount of healing that we'll see at times.
Yeah, totally agree. Now, a lot of the women that listen to my podcast are in this ancestral based, realm. are talking a lot about, raw milk and sourdough bread. But in the conventional world, a lot of times when it comes to healing, like healing the gut, they usually will say, oh, you need to go dairy free, or, oh, you need to go like grain free. So there's a lot of like competing and like conflicting information there. So why don't you just take the next couple minutes and talk about how would you navigate a food sensitivity, maybe in dairy or in gluten, in an ancestral diet approach?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I really like talking about this. I mean, one of the things I'm most passionate about as a nutritionist is helping people overcome food sensitivities and be able to enjoy food. Because I think that even in kind of the larger, like, functional medicine world, and even just as social media is talking about wellness and everything, there's has been such a demonization of gluten and dairy, and there absolutely can be a place, especially depending on the quality and the person, where it's not going to be a right fit for everyone. But I have found that you know the food a lot of the times is not the problem. So even thinking about dairy specifically, um, yes, can it be a trigger and lead to digestive symptoms or skin breakouts or these different things? Absolutely, that's a very real thing. But it's not because the food is actually the cause. So in functional medicine, we always think of root cause, right? Why is this? Why are you having digestive symptoms? Why are you having acne? Why are you having brain fog? And when we think about the root of it, that can then look like a variety of different things. So, again, thinking more specifically about maybe a dairy sensitivity, which is really very common. One thing could be simply the quality of the dairy. And I mean, some people automatically, they're like, yeah, I have raw milk and I'm feeling great. I've never been able to tolerate anything else. That was like my intro. I was dairy free for a long time, switched to raw milk, and I was like, cool. Now I mean, I can even handle conventional milk now. It's insane. It's
Yeah.
very exciting. But so part of it's the quality, but some people, even with raw milk, even with amazing organic quality products, they could still really feel unwell. And then that's when we think deeper into, specifically me. I mean, I specialize in gut issues. We're looking at digestive capacity, at microbiome, at the way that the nervous system affects the gut. So we're thinking like gut brain axis, and just general like state of your immune system inflammation. So something that I frequently work on with people that have persistent food sensitivities and digestive issues and things like this is getting more data about what's going on. And so that might look like a GI map stool test. So, testing to see what are your actual like digestive enzymes looking like? What is your bacteria looking like? Is that low? Is it high? Do you have a parasite? What's your immune system looking like? And as we heal the gut and optimize digestion, work on nervous system and all these pieces, again, I see food tolerance improve, because again, food is not the problem. It really is the environment.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times, like you said, the food will be blamed. In reality, it's such, our guts have been trashed from so many freaking pesticides, glyphosate, atrazine, all these, so many different things that are just, ruining our insides. And then, milk will get the bad rap, or gluten will get the bad rap. I talk a lot with my own clients, or just people that I'm working with, about just like healing and sealing like your gut. And I talk a lot about like, making your own homemade bone broth, and, not maybe necessarily like taking a probiotic, but like learning how to make your own sauerkraut. So there are things that you can do, but what are some of your like top tips for like gut health? Is it the bone broth? Is it, the beef gelatin gummies? Is it like no coffee on an empty stomach, like limit caffeine? Like, what are some of your top tips that you're seeing yourself saying over and over again?
Yeah. I mean, those both are really great things. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Glycine is going to be in bone broth.
Yeah.
Collagen gelatin is going to be wonderful. So, but I would say a couple of my top ones that are very underrated, I would say, is the way that we eat. So, thinking about, again, I kind of mentioned this earlier with like gut brain and like nervous system. So, the state of our nervous system is going to massively impact our digestive function, meaning if we're in fight or flight, if we're eating in a rush, we're multitasking, we're inhaling our food, we are operating more out of this fight or flight state, and our brains are primal, and it's saying, okay, this is not the time to pull blood flow away from our vital organs. Like, we're not going to digest properly. We're not going to, secrete all the digestive, secretions that we need, like stomach acid and enzymes and bile and all that. So one of the things is, let's help us get into this parasympathetic rest and digest mode, especially at meal times in general. Yes, like just throughout our days. But that can be really hard for people that are, busy working professionals, busy moms running around. And, we just are, most of us are having a hard time with that. So first off, I would say sit down for your meals, chew to applesauce consistency, take at least 20 to 30 minutes to eat your food, and like putting your fork down and all those kinds of things. I'm telling you, like, I'll have people come back and they're like, my bloating is like, reduced 50 to 75%, like after like just incorporating something like that. Part of it is also when we chew our food super well, our food has more time to mix with our enzymes in our saliva. So digestion starts in the mouth. It doesn't start, once it's past that. So the way we eat is super important. And then the other big one I would say is actually incorporating more bitter foods. So we have more bitter taste receptors in our GI tract than any other taste. So if we eat, and which includes even things like something like a sauerkraut, an arugula, a cacao nib, ginger, different herbs, when we have that with, or ideally before a meal, our body is now prepared to digest. Now it releasing all these digestive secretions where our digestive symptoms can really reduce quite a bit. And in general, I mean, I think both of these things, when we're mindfully eating and we're incorporating some of these foods, that also does a lot of good for our microbial balance, because these digestive secretions also have natural antimicrobial properties. So it's just, it all comes kind of full circle of like, if we're not digesting well, if we're not eating these foods where, standard American diet, there's not anything bitter anywhere, right? So we need to make the effort to include these types of foods. Then we're naturally able to fight off, this overgrowth, and we're protecting our, our gut in so many ways, and then like digesting super properly. So I could say a bunch more, but I would say those are my top two.
Yeah. No, I'm actually glad you brought up the bitters, because digestive bitters have been like around for thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
Like tinctures, things, right? Like that's been pretty normal. Another thing that I thought was really cool is kind of in this ancestral, mindset. They're always kind of talking about having like a vinegar or like a vinegar based like item in your meal. So that could be like a vinaigrette. Another one that I pulled from actually the glucose goddess was taking a shot of apple cider vinegar before you have a meal. And from a personal, anecdotal experience, I dealt with like gastritis, like all growing up. Like I would eat Tums like they were candy because my stomach would hurt so bad, and so I was like kind of naturally healing myself. And for a long time, I took a shot of apple cider vinegar before each of my meals. And I think that did prepare the acidity of my stomach to take on the food and digest it properly. So I just was curious if you have ever recommended or done like the vinegar before the actual meal.
Oh my God, every day. Yeah.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
literally all
Yeah.
the time. I don't know why I didn't mention that one, because I'm like, that is like literally the top one.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I was like, yeah, I've definitely done that one.
Oh yeah. I will say though, make sure to dilute it. Don't do it straight.
Yeah.
It's really bad for your enamel of your teeth.
Yeah. I
So
was gonna say it's terrible for your
like
teeth.
a little teaspoon of apple cider vinegar and a few ounces of water before a meal. It also has a lot of blood sugar benefits as well on top of digestive benefits. So yeah, that is a fantastic one.
Yeah.
And if you get it with the mother in it, then you're actually getting
Yeah.
probiotics too.
For sure. For sure. Another thing that I did during that time frame that kind of goes in with that nervous system, balance that you were talking about, was I stopped waking up and then slamming a bunch of water, because the water was then diluting my digestive enzymes or diluting the acidity that I did want to have in my stomach. So instead, I just kind of subbed it for more warm, nutrient dense foods. So I subbed like a glass of water in the morning for like a warm cup of bone broth. So not only am I getting now my collagen, like you said, glycine, there's gelatin, there's protein, and it's warm, and there's minerals in it. And so I just felt like that was a much, and it just makes sense, way to like warm up and like, break my fast, for breakfast, to warm up and wake up my digestive system, than just like waking up and drinking like a glass of cold water. Like I felt like that was intuitively just shocking my system.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think temperature can make a really big difference. I always think of like how in the postpartum period, like one of the best
Mm-hmm.
things you can do for yourself is like warming foods.
Yeah.
But I'd say in general, that's a really great thing to do.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, like the latest craze, you already know what I'm going to say. The latest craze of supplements is Arma colostrum.
Mhm.
So what is your view of that? Because they are claiming that it's like healing and sealing your gut, and it's going to like, reduce all of these like allergic symptoms or autoimmune symptoms, and it's going to like heal your digestive system. So do you feel like it's worth it? And also, if you do think it's worth it, do you feel like the quality of it is like, I don't know, just the quality of it, because it's like, it's freeze dried and then it's in a powder and you're rehydrating it? I just would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, that's a fun question. So I would say, in general, when we're thinking about colostrum benefits, I mean, they're there. Like, colostrum is amazing for so many things. I mean, we naturally get it, right, as babies. And it's not something natural that we take maybe throughout our life. But when we take the immunoglobulins from colostrum, whether you're taking like the bovine one that they're using, or what I regularly use in my practice is dairy-free immunoglobulins. I do see that being really, really helpful for supporting the immune system of the gut. Different benefits from that could be more gut resilience. So kind of just that general like gut strength. And then we can also see benefits with histamine issues like allergies, just general immune support, even like skin, hair, stuff like that. In terms of the actual product, I haven't done a super big deep dive into Arma, so I can't necessarily comment on like their practices, but at least what I use in my practice, I love Mega IgG by Microbiome Labs. It's also certified dairy free, which is nice for some people. So, and I will say it's super good quality, and it's not, it just feels appropriately priced. So it feels more
Yeah.
accessible. So that's just what I tend to use. In practice, I don't think every single person needs it, but because I do a lot of GI map stool testing, we get intestinal immune markers on there, which is called secretory IgA. And very commonly, I'm seeing it very low. And this can be a great way to support that immune system for kind of long-term, more like sustainable gut health after
Mm-hmm.
someone has done a lot of work to heal their gut.
That's really good to know. You probably saw on Instagram at this point, but I ended up having like an emergency appendectomy in Peru. Yeah, it was flipping insane. And as somebody who's like pretty crunchy, like I'm cringing at the thought of taking that many rounds of antibiotics. Oh my gosh. But again, I was like in a foreign country. So of course I'm going to like do everything I can to like take, stay sanitary and be smart and all those things. But at the same time, I'm thinking right when I get back, to the US and I'm healing, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have got to work on my gut. And I'm actually lucky enough to have like a bunch of like functional RDs that work in the same office as my functional nurse practitioner. So I'm about to see them. I'm getting my labs pulled next Tuesday. And we're doing like the whole gambit of just like allergy testing. Obviously, conventional medicine is going to say that having it, your appendix explode is like, it's haphazard, but anybody that works in a functional or holistic space is like, no, there's a root cause, So I think we're going to dive into that a little bit, but do you have any, like quick tidbits for anybody who's had to take antibiotics on like what's the best things they can do afterwards to help flourish the good bacteria in their gut and just kind of repair from all of that medicine?
Yeah, gosh, I feel for people that just like like for you when you're in a place where you just kind of like, well, I
Yeah,
got to do it, and grateful for that medicine right when we need it. But
of course.
yes, I would say following up with a probiotic. I mean, I'm not one of those people where like I think every person needs a probiotic. I think we all really need individual things, but after we've kind of like totally destroyed so much of our gut,
Mhm.
I think that's a really good time to replenish. You can do this with food. I think depending on how long you took them for, how many, food may not be enough. And that's where I would
Mhm.
use a supplemental form. My favorite would be a Saccharomyces boulardii. That's going to be
Mhm.
particularly helpful if you have actual like side effects with your antibiotics and you have like antibiotic related, loose stools and diarrhea and things like that. Saccharomyces boulardii is a wonderful one, or you could do like a full spectrum. And that doesn't have to be forever, but I would.
Somebody recommended that to me. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off. Somebody recommended that to me, and I just saw it at my functional health, or sorry, my functional, like, not, wow, let me back up. Not my functional, my natural food stores
Mm.
has one over here. So after this call, I'm probably going to go down there and grab that. Because like you said, I mean, this may be TMI, but ever since I got back, I've been having like kind of one bout of like diarrhea a day. And that was like very not normal for me. So I know something's off for sure. And somebody had recommended that one to me. I don't know how to say it. The sac Bilardi something.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So that's actually really good to know. Could you talk? I mean, I don't know if you have more information about that, but could you talk about that one particularly?
Well, I will. I was going to say too, like I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the colostrum and like immunoglobulins, how it supports our immune system. And one of
Yeah.
the best, like if you weren't to do immunoglobulins, like one of those products, Saccharomyces boulardii is probably the next best thing to support your
Okay.
immune system. So it's not just kind of rebuilding because it's one strain. Typically, you'd think, oh, why would we just do one strain? Like you would want to do almost like
Yeah.
a spectrum, but it's because of the effects on your immune system that are so
Mm.
profound that it kind of helps not just rebuild, but it supports that kind of, again, that sort of resilience. And it just has been so well studied for helping with that loose stool. So, yeah,
Good to know. Well, I'm going to bop on down there after we're done talking.
there you go. It's awesome.
How funny. Okay, perfect. So, talked about healing and sealing the gut. Now let's move on to wait, did you have anything else to say? I kind of cut you off on that one.
I don't think so.
About sealing the gut. Probiotic. Was there antibiotics after antibiotics. Was there anything else that you would recommend?
Uh, yeah, I would say that's a big thing. I mean, it's a lot of the same things we've talked about, like, the bone broth, the
Yeah.
gelatin collagen obviously is going to be super helpful and just kind of taking it easy. But yeah, I would say that's the main thing.
Okay, perfect. Now let's transition to like a typical menstrual cycle, right? So generally speaking, menstrual cycle, starts bleeding phase, menstrual, and then going into follicular. Then you have your ovulatory phase, and then you go into your luteal phase. So as a functional nutritionist, what would you say is like how important is it to eat in alignment with your menstrual cycle? This is obviously assuming that you have a regular menstrual rhythm. And this is also assuming you're not on like hormonal birth control. So, would you say that that's actually important? And if it is, how would you take steps into aligning that?
Yeah, so it's kind of this whole like cycle syncing conversation, right? Of like how to live a what's the term people are using, but like a more I think people are just a lot more mindful about what phase they're in
Mm-hmm.
and like living by that. I would say I'm sort of more of like a moderate like approach to it where I think that it can be very helpful to be just aware of where you are in your cycle in general. I think it can be validating in some ways where we can kind of uh, just give ourselves more kindness too and like not expecting ourselves to be the same version of ourselves like every single day all the
Mm-hmm.
time. So I think when it comes to food with that, it can be helpful to keep that in mind so that, you can make some moderate shifts. But at the same time, I think that it can be sometimes a little bit it might cause some stress too to think like, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
I have to change the way I'm eating like every week. And that can be a little bit overwhelming. And to be honest, like that's not something I even personally do for myself in terms of
Yeah.
like majorly changing the way that I eat week to week. I think if we have our foundations of how we're eating, the foods that we're eating, for the most
Hmm.
part, I don't necessarily see that needing to shift dramatically week to week.
Hmm.
There might be some kind of subtle things that we can do, and I do think this will change potentially person to person if someone is having more symptoms with, PMS or different things that we're working on. But like one of the things, for example, is like some suggestions out there with cycle syncing is to like have more liver detoxifying foods in like part of your cycle, because you're detoxing the extra estrogen. So then we want to reduce PMS. But in my point of view, I'm like, let's include liver detox foods all month long, or when we're
Hmm.
thinking about, some people might include more animal based, kind of warm, protein rich things during a menstrual phase. But again, I would say we would benefit from that all month long. So again, I'm kind of in this like, I acknowledge it being helpful, but I think we can kind of live by the foundations and keep it simple most of the time.
Yeah, for sure. I think if I were to, through the lens of being a strength coach, the things that I'm mainly, concerned with when it comes to food based on what phase you're in is just understanding the basics of, you're going to be less heat tolerant, and you're going to drain a lot of your minerals during your luteal phase because your progesterone's really high, and also your basal body temperature is high. So through thermoregulation, your metabolism will kick up about 10%. So from an athletic perspective, I'm just thinking more food, more water, more minerals.
Absolutely.
Like it boils down to those basics. Whereas, in your follicular phase, like you're probably going to feel a little bit more flexible in the way that you can eat. Whereas we innately already know the week before our periods, we're already grabbing the more hearty foods. We're grabbing the salty foods. And it's like, I wonder why. It's because our minerals are being depleted. So I think even then it can be intuitive. It's just making those choices when you are more ravenous, like in your luteal phase, you can choose like a healthier option and version than just like raiding your pantry. Like if you have that tool up front, you can kind of get ahead of that wanting to like munch on like hearty foods. And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying we can make like a better choice. Like we can have, a pot pie, which is fine, like a hearty food versus just like going into your pantry and then just like eating all of the chips because you're craving those minerals.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think that's where just the awareness piece of it comes in, of just
Mm-hmm.
being aware of maybe those, generally what's going on in those different phases.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think of, I mean, and I think the kind of the way that movement and exercise changes in the cycle is, I think, such a big part of that. Because obviously, if you're moving
Mm-hmm.
differently or your intensity is changing, like that will absolutely affect the way that we're eating and even just like our appetites. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I agree.
Cool. So my like basic, academics covers nutrition, and I've had to kind of learn the more ancestral mindset along the way. But obviously I'm a strength coach, like first and foremost, but you can't obviously work in like some type of fitness industry without people asking you about food. So you have to be knowledgeable on it anyways. But I've always given like general guidelines in regards to how much of each macronutrient you need for like healthy body composition, which typically does not align with the recommended daily values because I'm going to lean a lot more on having enough protein and having enough carbohydrates to fuel workouts. So I'm very like body composition and athletically minded when I give those guidelines. But do you have just like general rules of thumb from your perspective of just like if somebody were to ask you on the street, like, how many grams of protein do I need a day? How many grams of carbohydrate do I need a day? How many grams of fat do I need a day? What would be your answer if you were just to make it super simple?
Yeah. So again, my personalization background is like, oh, I want to give so much nuance right now. But
And that's fine.
yeah. Well, I would say in general, like thinking about protein, for women, I'll say more specifically, I don't think any woman needs less than 100 grams of protein. I find that majority need more than that. I think where I find where I have to kind of really personalize, especially just with the client population I see a lot with having gut issues, we often need to be really mindful of digestive capacity. A lot of people have a really hard time breaking down protein, so they wouldn't be able to
Mhm.
jump up. I mean, a lot of people are coming in with eating like 50 to 75 grams of
Yeah.
protein when they start working with me. So it would be really tough to say, okay, jump up to 1 gram per pound of body, ideal body weight, which is what I would agree with in general, is the 1 pound or 1 gram per pound of body weight. But a lot of the times we are really gradually working towards that as we're healing some other things. So that's where I had to add some nuance.
Yeah. Oh gosh, absolutely. I think most people that I've ever worked with, I'm sorry, they're eating like 50 grams of protein. And like you said, their gut will not be able to handle even another 50-gram jump. So even saying, the basic minimums of 100 grams, my gosh, that might be so hard on their stomach. And they will also feel so full too, trying to
Yes.
get them to eat like that much meat.
Yes.
Like that's going to be pretty difficult. So I totally agree with you. Now, in regards to the other two macronutrients, carbs and fats,
Mhm.
are you going to personalize those based on, like, are you going to lean more heavily on carbohydrates for a particular type of patient versus leaning more heavily on the fat for a particular type of patient?
Definitely. I would say that even like thinking about blood sugar and people who are coming in with insulin resistance, prediabetes, things like that, we are going to, my recommendation is going to be more like low, moderate carb. I would say like not even low, but just, I mean, I think that women need carbs. People need carbs, and that is very, very foundational. So it's always going to be a big part of it. But I might say, hey, that might be 30 to 35% of your total caloric intake versus someone who is super active and doing a lot of cardio and maybe doesn't have as many, blood sugar type issues, could benefit from a higher percentage of caloric intake. I'll say with the fat piece too, though, that's what I find that some people naturally do better on a higher fat diet than other people, digestively, genetically, some different reasons. So that might also be a time where if someone, maybe does have the blood sugar issues, maybe they have PCOS or different types of things, we might lean more on that higher fat, higher protein, a little bit lower carb type of diet. I tend to not be extreme with any macronutrient, one or the other, try to find a balance between them all. But that's where, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. So, I don't typically espouse any like, dramatic diet. Obviously, we've kind of established that. And even with my clients, like I'm pretty hesitant to picking like something that's like extreme. However, I would say the past year or so, my thoughts have been challenged a little bit, and I'd love to hear your opinion. So obviously we know that women need carbohydrates, and even from a primitive standpoint, right? Like if females' bodies are not, gathering enough berries for the body to say, oh, we have enough calories around, you're taking care of yourself, therefore you can reproduce and take care of the next generation. And then if there's not enough food around, particularly carbohydrates, the menstrual cycle will be affected, and then they will not be able to take care of themselves. Therefore, their body will not want to reproduce, primitively speaking. However, recently, and this is actually not a recent thing, my mind has been adjusted a little bit on this recently, is that I have the book Real Food for Fertility, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, and it's becoming more and more popular in today's trendy talking points. Is that Callie and Casey Means talk a lot about metabolic dysfunction, and they're talking about how 25% of women in their fertile years have PCOS, which is a form of basically diabetes. It's on the diabetic spectrum, right? And it was interesting, Callie Means talks a lot about how in Europe, before they're given women with PCOS, before they're given any medication, they are either required or it is suggested that they go on the keto diet for 12 weeks to give their ovaries a massive reset in regards to their glucose and their insulin sensitivity, give it a massive reset for 12 weeks, understanding that that keto diet is not a long lasting diet, but a temporary solution to hopefully reset their glucose and insulin, and then be able to go back on a more moderate, regular ancestral diet. That would be ideal. And at first I was like, no keto for anybody, women need carbs. But also, the more I'm reading, and the more I'm reading, even in books that I really admire, like Real Food for Fertility, it brings up the keto diet pretty heavily for women who have a pretty bad bout of PCOS. So have you thought about this? I'm sure you have. What's your opinion? We'll go from there.
Yes, I know. It's so interesting to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I was also in that same boat for a while where I don't like any, dieting, when people
Yeah.
come to me like, are you going to put me on a diet? I'm like, no, literally I don't put anyone on a diet. Like it's about learning how to eat, and having those foundations. But I would say, yeah, I mean, there's really good research, on it and I think it's the way that it's done. And I mean, you can follow a keto diet and it look very different from person to person, depending on the foods you're choosing, the quality. So obviously that's going to matter a ton. I will say that I personally don't use it very frequently with clients, not because I don't think there's merit to it or anything like that, but and maybe it's some of the people that I'm seeing, or I think in general, is that it can be really challenging for people practically to actually follow that
Yeah.
regimented of a diet, because you can't half-ass it. It's like you have to fully do
Mm-hmm.
it, because your body is physiologically changing the way that it is, creating energy in the body, and you kind of have to be all in with something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And I will say, I tend to, at least the people that I work with, we tend to kind of have this more gradual, like these gradual changes when it comes to diet.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think if it was the right person that was kind of at that point where they were ready to kind of be a bit more disciplined and really change, and that, affects, social life and the way things look with other people. I mean, you have to be more diligent about tracking and being aware that you are getting enough fat
Mm-hmm.
and that you are not overdoing it on your carbs. I mean, I think it just requires a lot more, but if the person is willing to do it, they understand that it's temporary, and there's a really, um, kind of specific way to come out of that and adopt a more balanced, kind of sustainable diet. That's the way to do it. And I think that there's so much benefit, to that. And I'll add just one more thing to that. When I think about PCOS, I mean, the insulin resistance piece is absolutely massive, but I'll also say that that's not the only root cause of PCOS. We also see, inflammatory PCOS and adrenal PCOS. So there can be cases where, a person actually has pretty decent blood sugar. I mean, I've worked with people that would fall into that category, but they have a lot of inflammation coming from different places. So maybe a keto diet may not be, the perfect solution for them. And we have to really focus on just a general anti-inflammatory. So.
Yeah. Okay. So talking about a general anti-inflammatory diet, what would that typically look like?
Yeah, so when I think of an anti-inflammatory diet, I think about, let's see, a few things. I would think of, well, what reduces inflammation. So what increases inflammation and what reduces it. So we would want to keep the more inflammatory foods limited. So obviously we're thinking of processed food, or thinking of seed oils, refined sugar, um, preservatives, right? All those types of processed food we want to keep, to a very minimum. And then increasing anti-inflammatory foods, which mainly we're thinking about antioxidants. And antioxidants can come from certain vitamins, right? We're thinking of, even things like vitamin A, C, E, which we can get from animal and plant-based, foods. So we want to have a good mixture of that. And then polyphenols, right? So we're thinking of all the flavonoids, which now we're thinking about color. So a colorful whole foods based diet that is nutrient dense, which I mentioned kind of at the beginning, is a kind of the most nutrient dense foods are going to come from animal based sources. So it's just this nice mix of whole foods where a balanced plate is going to have high quality protein, healthy fats. I mean, the type of fats we're choosing are massively important in a anti-inflammatory diet. And then having, plants that are going to provide fiber and some of those other nutrients that we may not get from animal-based foods. Yeah.
Sure. So if you have a client that is either adverse to eating vegetables, but not because they're vegetables, but mainly because their digestive system has a hard
Mhm.
time breaking down vegetables, or they just, again, don't include enough vegetables, what would you say are the best ways to prepare vegetables? Or is that a sign that like people shouldn't be eating that many vegetables? So what are your take on vegetables and either how to prepare them or incorporate them or not incorporate them?
Yeah. So I would say the type of vegetable is going to matter. So there's going to be some vegetables that are just harder to digest, but they're more fermentable. Doesn't mean that they're bad, right? I'm thinking about like the cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. I think those are really powerful liver detox supportive foods. So ideally, I'd love for people to be able to incorporate those. But if they are having gut issues, those are going to be some of the hardest ones to include. So
Mhm.
in the short term, I would say, yeah, we're probably going to be eating less of those and eating more things like squashes and even like spinach, arugula, carrot, like more like root vegetables and squash type
Okay.
cooked foods are going to be easier to digest. Obviously, you can incorporate some of those other digestive tips that we were talking about before. I would also say, what was the other thought that I was having? Soaked, sprouted is more for like grains and legumes. So for
Mhm.
vegetables specifically, I would just say really being mindful about the raw and limiting that or avoiding that
Yeah.
altogether, especially if you're having issues. And then I would say that if you are having a lot of digestive issues with more of those kind of tougher vegetables or raw vegetables, that's where it's kind of more of a sign to work on that digestive function and that,
Mhm.
the microbiome, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, because I do think that there is a lot of benefit to gain from eating these foods and having a variety.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a couple people go, or just like people I've talked to, go on like a low FODMAP diet. Could you talk about that and maybe like your opinion of it?
Yes. So the low FODMAP diet is so kind of as I'm talking about these cruciferous vegetables, those would be considered high FODMAP because they are highly fermentable, right? So we're also, when we're thinking about higher FODMAP foods, just to kind of explain it a little bit for those that don't know, it would be those like cruciferous vegetables, certain dairy, certain grains, even certain fruits. And so a lot of times when someone is having issues, digestive issues or diagnosed with something like IBS, they are frequently put on a low FODMAP diet, which can be helpful in the short term because you're reducing the amount of fermentable carbohydrates that you're eating, which means less bloating, less gas, things like that, which can feel like a relief in the meantime. It is also quite restrictive and it can be hard to navigate because it's not just about avoiding the food, it really is about the amount. So you could probably tolerate, some avocado, but if you eat the entire avocado, then that is going to add to the, fermentable load. And then if you had that avocado with broccoli, right, it all kind of adds up. So it can be a bit complex. And so it can be a bit overwhelming. So in the short term can be a great tool to just help with symptom relief. In the long term, it is not something that I recommend because it is really, for one, stressful, I think, to have to
Yeah.
navigate that kind of diet. And then it really dramatically limits your food choices and the variety that we're having, which variety is one of the best things that you can do for your long-term gut health. So that's where I would definitely recommend working on, yeah, digestive function and microbiome.
Yeah. That's what I figured. Now, obviously, we just talked about like, lowering overall inflammation, which goes hand in hand with like elevating your general energy throughout the day. So, would you want to talk about some holistic ways to support your natural energy production? And I'm sure that also takes into account caffeine intake. What does that daily rhythm of food look like to support your energy?
Yes. Oh, there's so many things we can do to support energy. Again, it just depends on why do we have low energy in the first place? So we have to personalize. But I'd say some general things. Obviously, sleep and circadian rhythm is going to be a big thing. I know that's not nutrition specific, but I would say it's definitely a big part of the conversation. So if that is something, like if you're not sleeping well, like do whatever you need to get better sleep. I will say mouth tape is a really great tool if you're not nasal breathing. So just wanted to throw that out there. And then along that same line of circadian rhythm support and really syncing our internal clock. So getting that first morning sun, if possible, getting some sunset light, right? Like red light is all the craze right now, and we can literally get natural red light from sunset. So not to knock the actual like red lights; those are great, but not accessible to everyone. So go on a sunset walk. Those things can be really helpful because that is going to directly impact your cortisol levels, which will
Sure.
affect your energy, right? So we want to start off really strong in the morning and get good sleep. And then when it comes to actually creating energy in the body, I think we have to remember what creates ATP, what creates energy in the body, and that is going to come from food. It's going to come from glucose. And I know that's like a maybe simple thing that feels like a duh thing, but I think a lot of people forget that it's like, oh, caffeine is not a nutrient, and not against caffeine. I think there's a place for it. I, have a cup of coffee right in front of me. So I'm with you. But I think we have to just remember to nourish ourselves, like ideally having a balanced breakfast first hour of waking, I recommend. And depending on what kind of morning routine looks like with like maybe when you're working out, it could always be like a pre-workout snack. It doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
to be like this massive meal, but we have to eat something balanced within that first hour. And then caffeine, if that's something that you're having, can be with food or after. I find that to be really, really helpful for energy. And then minerals are a really big thing because minerals are actually going to help. So when we think about the kind of creation of ATP, kind of think back to like science class of like citric acid cycle. Glucose doesn't automatically become ATP. It has to go through this whole process that is very micronutrient dependent. So I wish I had an image up, but like you can actually see that minerals like magnesium or different vitamins like B vitamins and all these little things kind of come in as cofactors and help that process along, kind of like a traffic circle, like a road. And when we don't have those minerals or different nutrients in place, like that gets sluggish, right? And we have more sluggish energy. So eating mineral rich foods, again, that's going to be animal based foods. It's going to be certain fruits, a lot of different things like that. And then adding in some electrolytes, right? Like having your adrenal cocktail, which I'm sure your audience knows about, having a mineral mocktail can really make a difference in the morning or in the afternoon whenever you need it. And then one more thing I'll say too, I mean, I could talk about energy for like a really long time, but is blood sugars, because even if you're doing all these things, but blood sugar is wonky, your energy won't be stable, right? Maybe you start off strong, but you have a massive energy dip in the afternoon, and that's when you need your second cup of coffee, or maybe that's when you start to crave sugar. Then it's maybe not so much an energy production issue like what we're talking about with the minerals, but it
Mm-hmm.
may be more of a blood sugar thing where you're kind of having spikes and crashes and dips and things, and we need to work on keeping that stable.
Yeah, for sure. And a book that is such an easy read and I learned so much from, even myself, was The Glucose Revolution.
Yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I'm sure. Everyone would recommend it. I don't know why anybody would not recommend it. Honestly, I learned so much from it. And I read it in like a day, I think, because I just was like consuming all of that information. But why don't you, I'm going to put you on the spot. Why don't you take us through your day? And let's talk like ideal day, right? Not like a day where things are chaotic, which honestly probably happens like more often than not, but just because like life. But why don't you take us through an ideal day for you on like what that morning routine would look like? What are you eating first? Like what are you being intentional about first? And then take us through like, your whole day. What does your sleep hygiene ideally look like? And I'm sure I'll have questions along the way.
Yeah, that's a fun question. Okay, I'm like ideal because this week has looked a little chaotic. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with the ideal. So I would say, okay, definitely I'm a like a 9.5 hour sleep girl. Ideally, I'm gonna say nine and a
Mhm.
half. So I would get that full sleep. I would wake up and have a decently slow morning where maybe I can either go out on a morning walk, even if it's like 5 or 10 minutes, or do some sort of um, just get some sort of light. Maybe I'm sitting for a second and like reading or journaling or doing something mindful. Um, I am hungry in the morning. I definitely have an appetite, so I would have some sort of breakfast. I'm big on meal prep. That helps me quite a bit. So whether it's doing like last week, I made this like egg sausage casserole frittata situation, which was delicious. So like warming that up and then having maybe a matcha with it or like a half calf coffee, which I end up drinking like half of. So yeah, doing something mindful, maybe getting some sun, having a balanced breakfast, um, and then moving into the day. I'll have my work day where I meet with clients, and then definitely taking a lunch break always, where I'll have either a balanced lunch. Again, I try to meal prep that when I can. I might do some sort of salad. I'm really into soups right now that we're slowly getting into fall weather, at least here in SoCal. It's not quite fall yet, but something like that. Probably go on a lunch walk as well, even if, again, it's like a 10-20 minute walk would be nice. And then moving into the evening after work, um, dinner is going to happen, which I'll usually, I don't know if I should get into like what I make for dinner or not, but usually try to keep it simple. But I enjoy cooking. It's something that when I can have a little bit more time for, it's something that is really relaxing to me, and I really enjoy it. I will say on a normal kind of chaotic day, that's not always the case. And that
Mhm.
can, sometimes it is just like warming up, like pre-bought chicken meatballs and like frozen quinoa, and like keeping it. That was a lot of my week last week, but sometimes it's more interesting than that. And then yeah, I might sometimes might want a little sweet treat. Like I made these peanut butter stuffed chocolate covered dates last week, which
Oh
was
yeah.
delicious. Might
Oh
have
yeah.
a little something like that after dinner. Maybe like an herbal tea. Again, maybe we're doing another little outdoor walk. I have a dog too, so she kind of helps get
Mhm.
me outside to do these little walks. Um, and then I want to be like in bed by like 9:30. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my ideal time if possible. Um, I am a big magnesium girl, so that helps me a lot. So I'll usually take a hefty dose of magnesium glycinate a lot of the times, depending on what my week is like, and if stress is a bit higher, I might take some cortisol support. So I love me a cortisol manager that has like some ashwagandha, L-theanine, some different things in there.
Mhm.
So sometimes I'll kind of take a couple supplements. Um, I have to have it pitch black, like my room. So I'm big, I'm mask girl, blackout curtains. That's a big
Mhm.
thing that helps me. White noise. I didn't used to be this high maintenance years ago, but I am now.
Yep.
And then sometimes I will do mouth tape. It's not something I do every night, but if I find myself mouth breathing or kind of noticing sort of those signs of mouth breathing,
Mhm.
I'll definitely stick on some mouth tape. I think that's it. I don't know if I missed
Yeah.
anything.
No, that's perfect. No, that's perfect. Yeah, I think it's hard. We can have like these ideal conversations, but the reality is like if you're not, a work from home, or if you're not like a stay-at-home mom and you're going out to the workplace, like you have to make adjustments from like ideal
Oh,
setups,
yeah.
right? Yeah. And so I think for me, like the biggest thing was just realizing that regardless of how early I'm leaving, like if I am awake, then I'm going to need to still get calories in within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up, even if it's, I leave for work at 6. So I'm up at 5. Like I'm starving by 6:30 or 7 and I'm already in my workday, you know? So I think
Yep.
incorporating small things like, you know, like a protein shake with milk in it. So it has it's a little denser than just like water and protein powder, you know? So I've been incorporating that more in the morning because I do wake up hungry. I'm not making like a 3-course breakfast at 5 a.m., you know?
Right.
So I think that's personally helped me out too. And then in the mornings, I'm drinking, you know, after like warming up my stomach, and like later, I'm having like a big thing of water that has like a half a scoop of electrolytes in it, and also my creatine in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like personally, every woman needs to be on creatine, especially if you're strength training. So I've talked about that a lot. I'm curious your thoughts on creatine. I'm sure you don't have anything negative to say about it, but
No, all thumbs up.
yeah,
All good
yeah,
things. I'm pretty inconsistent with it. I'm going to be honest, though. I need to take it
yeah.
more often.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes it's hard to take, but yeah, I'll try to take that in the morning for sure. Recently, I started adding in more. Oh my gosh, starts with the G. It helps with resealing of your stomach. It's an antioxidant. Uh, oh my
Glutathione?
gosh, I have it. What's that?
Glutathione?
Thank you. Yes. I started taking glutathione in the morning just because I'm like on this, you know, trajectory of trying to, you know, clear myself out and heal it up from all the chaos. So I've been taking glutathione in the morning. Another supplement I had to ask you about was the Intelligence of Nature, the Ion Biome.
Ah, yeah.
I don't know if you've ever recommended that for your clients, but I've seen like some pretty cool progress and impacts from that supplement as well.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating one. I will say, I mean, I tried it on myself and I've tried it on a few clients, and I'm not going to lie, I didn't see like
Mm-hmm.
anecdotally a whole lot of more visible kind of changes or like
Yeah.
kind of tangible benefits from it. I believe in it. I think
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot of benefit, but
Yeah,
I didn't see it happening. And so because I try to keep supplement protocols as simple as possible
for
and just
sure.
like choose the things that are going to make the highest impact, I haven't been recommending it as much. But I will say sometimes I'm forgetting the actual compound that they're using, but the other companies will use the like fulvic and humic acid.
Humic acid. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll use that in certain products. So I always like to see that when I see that showing
Yeah.
up in products, but that one in and of itself, I've been not
Yeah.
doing as often.
Weary of. Yeah, totally. And then in regards to like a multivitamin, I'm assuming if you have an ancestral viewpoint, you're typically recommending, I'm assuming, you know, desiccated liver or desiccated organs, or are you typically recommending other things for women?
Yeah, I would say it depends. I mean, I'm not a huge multivitamin recommender. I would say because just in my practice, I, do a lot of lab testing, we do blood work, and we can get a
Yeah.
lot more personalized with what people need. I use beef liver and organ meats pretty frequently with people, and desiccated can make it really easy. But there are some things that, beef liver doesn't have that certain people might need, where
Mm-hmm.
we might need to supplement with extra, or if they're on like a gut protocol and they're already taking a lot of other capsules, they may not want to take 6 capsules of
Yeah.
beef liver, which is a lot, and I
It's
totally
a
get
lot.
that. So kind of depends. And so sometimes I'll use more of a prenatal, especially if someone
Mm-hmm.
is like trying to conceive. I love kneaded full well,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
type. So kind of just depends on the person, but I use all of it.
Nice. So if somebody has like gut distress, you know, classic signs of maybe like IBS or even SIBO or things like autoimmune issues or allergies, from a functional standpoint, what are some tests that they can look into or maybe recommend or bring up to their provider from your standpoint to get done, tests to get done?
Yeah, so blood work wise, I would do several things. I mean, I would look at a full thyroid panel, so not just your TSH, but really looking at free T3, free T4, TPO, because thyroid is going to, affect your motility and the actual rate of movement in your body. And if you're hypothyroid, that's absolutely could be a root cause of some digestive issues. Certain nutrients, a full iron panel, B vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D is all going to affect the gut. So just getting a full look at everything, looking at inflammation markers like HSCRP. So I would say that would be for some blood work. And then, I'm a huge fan of the GI map stool test, and something
Yeah.
I use, if anyone comes to me with any gut issues, I'm always going to be recommending that test. Depending if there's like a SIBO background or a really high suspicion of SIBO, we might do like actual breath testing,
Mhm.
just case by case.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for your time today. You gave us so much to think about.
Thank you. It was very fun to talk about all this. You can tell I can talk about this for hours.
Oh my gosh, I know. We're going to need a part 2 and we can dive down some of these more specific things like PMS, PCOS, blood sugar regulation. There's a lot of things we can talk about, but this is a good part 1 for sure.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.